A flash of cold blue light rips across a dying sky. A man falls out of the tear, hits ferrocrete, and stands up like he's done this 1,000 times before. 3 claws whisper out of his knuckles. He doesn't know where he is, but the air tastes like sook, iron, and old wars. This is the 41st millennium, where angels wear armor, gods feed on madness, and hope is a rumor. He's survived Weapon X, Sentinels, and World Enders. But the galaxy he's just landed in doesn't care who he was. It only wants to know if he can bleed, and how long he can keep fighting when the bullets explode and the screams never stop. The sky tears like old cloth and spits him into a world that tastes of rust and burnt prayers. He lands hard on cracked ferrocrete, palms down, boots sliding through ash and powdered bone. The first breath scalds. The second finds the flavor. A heavy mix of promethium smoke, coppery dust, and a sweet, rotten tang he's learned to hate in every language. Battlefield. He raises his head. Towers climb like broken teeth. Lumen strips flicker in dead windows. Somewhere far below, the hive's sump pumps throb like a tired heart. Somewhere far above, the spires burn. He hears the war before he sees it. A rolling, idiot joy pours down the avenue. Thunderous feet, crude engines, chain blades chewing masonry to gravel. A horn blares, not musical so much as a dare to the universe. Green bodies flood the boulevard, shouldering each other aside, firing weapons that kick like mules and aim like drunks. They're laughing. The laughter never sits right with him. It's not bravado. It's appetite. A slug catches him in the ribs. It spins him, steals a grunt he didn't intend to give. He looks down at the fresh hole in his jacket, at the wet red welling there. The pain is bright, then bright and gone. His skin cinches and knits with a sound like a match head fizzing. He reaches in, pinches the hot metal between thumb and forefinger, and flicks it clinking onto the street. The nearest orc blinks, slow, confused. Then he shows it something the galaxy hasn't seen here yet. 3 metal lines sliding out of his fists with a sound like a promise. He moves without thinking, because thinking is a luxury you take after. The first green head is a weight in his hand. The second is a spray. The third is a forearm that hits the ground before the body remembers to fall. Orc rounds smash chips from the ferrocrete behind him. He runs forward into the fire because that's where their accuracy dies, because he knows where bodies keep their mistakes. A chopper screeches against his skull and throws sparks. His bones ring. He buries a claw under the thing's jaw hinge and levers hard. Teeth and laughter stop at the same time. A new sound cuts through, the disciplined thud of heavy weapons. He smells cordite and machine oil and clean fear. Across the boulevard, an Imperial line spills from sandbagged emplacements, flak-armored figures, braced behind slab shields, red optics glaring from turrets. They shoot in rhythm. He can feel it in the soles of his boots. Somebody barks counts over a voxnet in a voice that won't allow panic the room to breathe. Last fire stitch marks the air, turning it to hot, ionized needles. He sprints, low and fast, through a gutter choked with debris. The guard are 20 meters and an age away. He hits a knee behind a wrecked hab truck as slugs hit where his head was going to be. Then he's up again and across open ground, because staying alive is sometimes the worst lesson you can teach a bullet. He slides into their trench, scaring a young trooper into almost pulling the trigger on his own helmet. "Mutie!" the kid wheezes, wide-eyed. "Asset!" another snaps, older, scar across his mouth like a permanent shut-up. "You fight?" He doesn't answer with words. He vaults the lip, lands on an orc that was deciding between two targets, and decides for it. Claws cut tendons, and heat and speed do the rest. He rips a shooter away from a human shape curled behind a toppled statue of a saint, and feels the statue's stone wings grind under his boots. The saint's face has been shot off. Not an accident. He files that away without knowing why. A priest in shredded robes plants himself at the trench line, voice hoarse, eyes raw. "Hold!" he croaks, then louder. "Hold!" He lifts a symbol high. It shakes in his grip. Not fear, fatigue. Logan respects that more than shouting. "Name?" barks the scar-mouthed veteran between salvos. "Logan, you sanctioned." "No." The man studies him in a single blink, weighing 3 answers he doesn't have time for against the fact that this stranger is already keeping 2 guardsmen alive with nothing but speed and bad ideas. "Fine." Your point noise. We're Bravo 3rd, 42nd Drusus. Don't get in front of the Russ when she spools. What's a Russ? "That," the veteran says, as the street goes white and the air tries to leave the city. A Lehman Russ main gun speaks, and a wagon's worth of orcs ceases to be a problem or anything at all. Tracks screech. A machine spirit howls through steel. The tank rams a burned-out storefront and makes its own door, turret swinging with lazy authority. Logan grins despite himself. He likes things that mean it. Above, rotors chatter. He hears them a breath before the line does, hears the loose bearing in the leftmost assembly, hears the cackle of a pilot who doesn't believe in tomorrow yet. Defcoptus scythe low, rockets hissing out like angry bees. "Down," someone yells, too late to help. He doesn't go down. He goes up. He finds a stack of rebar, runs at it, and vaults into open air. The first copter rips past close enough that he feels the heat of its filthy engine on his teeth. He grabs the pilot by the harness. The momentum spins them together, and then they're a knot falling through smoke. They hit hard, but only one of them has a reason to get back up. He's already running when the rocket the dead pilot fired finds a wall and turns it into dust and nails. Back in the trench, a medic is elbow-deep in a trooper who's doing his best not to make it anyone's problem. The medic glances at Logan's torn shirt, at the red seam closing itself, then snaps his attention back to the man under his hands. "If you're not dying, grab me another charge pack and the field cauterizer." Logan almost says he's not much for tools. Then he sees the kid's pulse stage on the medic's wrist and shuts up. He shoulders through bodies, finds the battered med crate under a tarp, and brings the kit back one-handed while batting an orc slug away with the other. The medic doesn't thank him. He doesn't expect it. This is the nearest he comes to prayer. Doing what needs doing without making it sacred. Something ugly crosses the street with purpose. A norb with iron hammered into places iron shouldn't be. It carries a banner of flayed things and an axe like a door. The line stutters when it roars. That's the point of a roar. Logan drops into the street to meet it before the pause grows teeth. The knob laughs in his face when the first claw strikes its shoulder. The plate holds. He expected that. He lets the second claw drag sparks on purpose, lets the brute lift its axe high for a grand finish. Then he goes small, dives between legs, cuts hamstrings, shoves with all his human weight as the thing drops into its own shadow. Its knee hits the ground. Armor gaps are never at the front. They're where proud things never look. He drives steel into the soft between gorget and chest. The laughter gurgles and tips out onto the stones. There's a flicker at the edge of his mind, like someone breathing down the back of his neck from the inside. The temperature steps sideways. He knows that feeling, even if he doesn't have a word for it here. Something crooked trying to pour itself through somebody. A weird boy stands on a wrecked transport, eyes bulging, jaw unhinging around a green light. The guard's volley glances off whatever bad joke passes for a shield. He can feel the skin on his arms crawl. He moves. A slug hits him square in the spine as he runs. He goes flat, skids, gets up already healing, and is in the weird boy's face before its spell finishes deciding who it wants to kill first. The world squeezes. The air gets crowded with whispers that are teeth. He answers with a very simple argument, delivered 3 times in a line from hip to crown. The pressure pops like an eardrum. The weird boy blinks at him, tries to find its head with its hands, and falls off the transport in 2 pieces that both look surprised. The line breathes. Breathing becomes shooting again. Shooting becomes advancing in short, mean bounds that put distance between the guardsmen and the fear their ancestors taught them to keep. A commissar strides along the trench, hat miraculously clean, bolt pistol like a sermon you can hold. He takes in Logan at a glance, muzzle stirring his way for a fractional second like a judge tapping a file. And then, to the commissar's credit, it points past him and barks orders at the living orcs rather than the inconvenient human who won't stay dead. "Scouts on me," the scar-mouthed veteran calls, and Logan is already moving because his feet liked the sound before his head did. They peel off down a side avenue, half collapsed, ribs of steel exposed, laundry lines still snapping like flags 3 floors up. He tests the air with his nose. Oil. Blood. Mushroom sweat. Gun lubricant specific to this regiment, bitter and clean. He uses the smells like a map and cuts left without looking. The squad follows because when somebody acts like they've been here before, sometimes you let them. They hit the orc flank, where it stops being a flank and starts being a belly. They find a grot with a satchel of weird, sticky bombs and stop it from becoming a very stupid hero. They spike a crude artillery piece with 2 frag grenades, then put a 3rd under the engine block because he's learned the difference between stopping a gun and stopping the people who loved shooting it. A scout with patched lenses takes a slug through the bicep and starts to shake. Logan pins him to the wall with a palm on the chest, looks him dead in the eye and says, "Breathe." The kid does. It surprises them both. By the time they spill back into the boulevard, the Russ has painted 3 fresh horizons where buildings used to be. A chimera wheezes smoke and courage, disgorging a squad that immediately sets up a gun like they were born with tripods for spines. The priest's voice is cracked to a thread. The commissar's hat is no longer clean. The veteran's scar looks deeper, but his eyes look lighter. Logan's jacket is a story of holes with no plot. The orcs decide, as one organism, that the joke has gone on long enough. Their laughter sours. The tide recoils, leaving bodies and spent brass and teeth the size of children's thumbs. Silence never arrives all at once in a place like this. It comes in cautious pieces. The sudden absence of a rotor, the way the tank's engine downshifts, the click of a safety someone forgot they still had on. He stands in it, breathing the metallic warmth of his own blood that isn't there anymore. He lights half a cigar he found on a dead man and discovers it tastes exactly like this world. He doesn't finish it. "Logan," the veteran says, leaning his elbows on the trench lip like it's a bar he's met his last 3 failures at. "You got a file?" "Not here." "You got a unit?" "Not here." The veteran looks at the priest, who's busy binding a book back together with a strip of his robe. He looks at the commissar, who's busy pretending he never almost shot an ally. He looks back at the man with the claws that still drip things best not named. "Fine. You've got a call sign now." "Wolf." He doesn't argue the irony. He doesn't explain that names are like scars, and you don't get to pick either. He rolls his shoulders, listens to the city creak around them like an old ship, and tilts his head at a distant thunder that isn't weather. The orcs will come again. Everything here comes again. He steps over the trench lip, back into the street where the last slugs still wobble blessedly to a stop. "Where are you going?" a trooper asks, because youth needs reasons. "Hunting," he says, and the word fits him here more than it has in years. He fades into the broken ribs of the hive, following a trail only he can smell. Hot metal, old hate, grease, laughter, trying to gather itself for another run. Behind him, the Imperials start counting their living. He doesn't stay to be counted. He'll be back when the horns sound, or when they don't but should have. He learned in a different universe that you don't wait for the next wave to find you. You go meet it in the place it thinks it's safe. Victory doesn't look like a banner. It looks like a silence fat with consequences. The orcs pull back, and the street becomes a museum of heat. Tank tracks still ticking, Lars burns still glowing in brick, the air tasting of copper coins and char. That's when the rosettes arrive. They come in a column that sounds expensive, suspensor-lit transports with machine spirits that purr instead of growl, men who don't clatter because their kit fits, a smell of sanctified oil and pride. The first thing into the boulevard is a servo skull trailing parchment prayers. The second is a woman whose presence rearranges everyone's spine. Black coat tailored like an argument. Rosette at her throat drinking the light. A hat that isn't a commissar's and therefore means worse things. The guardsmen stiffen on instinct that predates their parents. The commissar tips his head the tiniest amount and becomes smaller in the room without moving. Logan rests his forearms on the trench lip and watches her shoes find clean places to step where there are none. "Designation," says one of the acolytes at her shoulder. Vox mask hisses, quill ready, eyes flat. Behind him, a pair of tempestuous troopers set their rifles to a polite angle that still points at vital things if he twitches. "Logan." He doesn't bother inventing anything fancier. "Origin." "Not here." "Psyker." "No." The quill scratches. The acolyte looks up like the answer is an insult. The woman, inquisitor, no doubt left for anyone who might be slow, speaks for the first time. Her voice is smoke held under glass. "You don't set off the Psy Ward," she says, almost to herself, glancing at a long wand in the tech adept's hands as it reads off nothing useful. "Yet your biology is aggressive." "Aggressive's one word," Logan says, meeting her eyes without baring his teeth. "Hard to kill is another." The acolyte's gaze flicks to the guardsman. Who authorized a mutant asset on this line? The scar-mouthed veteran shrugs the shrug of a man who knows he's going to be shot someday and has made his peace with when. He authorized himself. Bled green. Saved lives. You're welcome. The bolt pistol in the hand of a bodyguard murmurs a warning slide check. The Inquisitor doesn't indulge it. She studies the headless weird boy cooling on the street, the knob laid out like a chapel offering, the 3 claw-scored lines that mark Logan's work wherever you happen to look. She nods once, a tiny courtly motion that admits a fact without falling in love with it. Detain him, she says. Medici, Auspex, quarantine. For the Imperium's safety, the cuffs are adamant, braided with hexagrammatic filigree that prickles against his skin like static and old superstitions. He lets them close on his wrists because there's a calculus here, and he's learned not to fight every lesson on the same day. The Tempestus troopers are efficient without being cruel. That's the difference between training and habit. He moves when they move. The guardsmen watch him go with expressions that don't quite fit regulation. The veteran lights a Elho stick with a hand that shakes now that it can. They put him in a transport that smells of new leather and burned incense, and the door seals with a hush that means money. Inside, a servo skull hovers at face level to read him. Its remaining eye ticks and chimes. Projectors flicker a lattice of red lines over his cheekbones, his chest, the pale slash of a new scar that's already lying about its age. Hold still, says a Medici in an arming doublet, whose cuffs have more stitching than sense. If the saint wills it, this won't sting. It's never the saint that stings, Logan says, but he doesn't move. The swab smells of antiseptic and dried petals. A syringe tries to make friends with his vein and gets crowded out by the way his body thinks of needles as mulch. The Medici's eyebrows do something they didn't teach him at Schola, when the vial fills and then empties itself back into the patient, because the wound it learned about is already a rumor. Fascinating, murmurs a tech priest in a forest of mechadendrites. Trace elements consistent with adamantium. Improvised latticework. Unorthodox surgical integration. Designation, heretic or pre-imperial origin? Not pre-imperial, Logan says, because the word doesn't fit in his mouth. Just not yours. Threat index? The acolyte presses, quill hungry. Amber, the Inquisitor says without looking up. Red if he lies or glows. They bring him into a space that pretends to be a chapel, but is really a room for decisions. Candles gutter. Purity seals bracket doorways. A metal grill on the wall has seen more confessions than air. A picked screen shows grainy footage of him dragging a guardsman out of rubble, vaulting a deaf copter, cutting something's breath into a different shape. Someone had a lens on him the whole time. Of course they did. Sit, the acolyte orders, pointing at a chair whose straps are older than anyone here. Logan remains standing. The nearest Tempestus takes a fractional step, professional enough not to make a meal of it. The Inquisitor raises a finger, and the room hangs there for a heartbeat. Indulge me, she says to Logan. We start with simple truths. You aren't a psyker. You don't read like a demon host. You regenerate at a rate that would make an Astartes apothecary suspect he was being mocked. Your skeleton tells stories that metallurgists will have to invent new prayers to process. You respond to authority with irritation, to suffering with service, and to containment with... How many times have you slipped those manacles? Twice, Logan says. 3 if you keep talking. A smile appears at one corner of her mouth and dies before anyone can accuse it of weakness. Where are you from? A place with different monsters. Why are you here? Something tore. I fell through. And your loyalty belongs to... He thinks about the guardsman with the stitched bicep concentrating on breathing like it's a job, the medic's steady hands, the priest holding a book together like faith was paper, the veteran who didn't look away when it was ugly and didn't flinch when it was beautiful. People, he says, not flags, not churches, the ones bleeding in front of me. The acolyte makes a sound that could curdle milk. The Inquisitor's eyes don't move. That's inconvenient, she says, and useful. A litany rolls through the vox beads in every ear in the room. Staccato, tight, a voice made to be obeyed. A perimeter breach, not orcs this time. Something faster, meaner, wearing trophies that were alive yesterday. The Tempestus troopers turn as one toward the door. The Inquisitor doesn't. Her gaze stays on Logan like the breach is an experiment, and he's the reagent. This city is not yet secure, she says conversationally, as if they were discussing wine. I would prefer not to lose assets I haven't finished cataloging. Then uncuff me, Logan says. No. She tilts her head, measuring whatever's behind his eyes against whatever's behind hers. Deploy him. Bound observe. If he flees or turns, kill him. If he saves us time, take notes. The Tempestus sergeant's jaw ticks. Orders are orders even when they're built to make you fail politely. They reseat the cuffs. They fit a collar around his neck that hums a mean little hum, studs pricking his skin with symbols made of needles. Null restraint, the sergeant says. Don't touch it. Wouldn't dream, Logan says, already testing the weight, the give, the story of it. They hand him back nothing. He doesn't need anything back. The corridor out of the chapel room is a throat of machine spirits and saints. Parchments kiss his shoulders. A servo skull follows like a pet that's also a witness. They push through a blast door into heat and bad decisions. The sound that greets them isn't orc laughter. It's a wet, hungry keen. A shard band of something spined and fast skitters along the face of a shattered hab and drops into the street like knives growing legs. Tyrannid rippers? Something related. Something that doesn't care what it's related to, as long as it eats. The Tempestus form a line, and their rifles write stern letters into the air. The first wave shreds, but the second isn't a wave. It's a net. Logan slips the cuffs. He doesn't think about it. He's already moving when the sergeant yells a word that begins with "stop" and ends with an oath. He hits the front like a bad idea with good timing. Claws make tidy work of untidy mouths. Carapace peels like fruit when you know where the seam runs. Teeth go for his calves. He gives them a boot and a bad attitude. 2 troopers go down. He's there before the things can decide which part to start with. He feels his collar buzz like a scorpion warning a dog off, and the hairs on his arms try to hide. A shadow rolls across the avenue, and the ground changes its mind about gravity. Something bigger is arriving. He smells acid and breeding pools and old insect light. He plants his feet, draws breath, and roars. It's not a war cry or a saga invocation. It's a reminder to the part of him that likes survival too much. Move. A pure strain streaks from a breach in the wall. He doesn't know the genus. He knows what a blade looks like when it thinks. It comes straight for the Inquisitor because hunger has a nose for command. He crosses the distance that should kill him and takes the hit that would end someone who doesn't collect endings. He locks one claw into the joint where the limb meets the thorax, and the other into the mouth that wants to make him a smaller story. They struggle with the intimacy of a dance no one will mention afterward. He bleeds. He heals. It dies. He doesn't. The Tempestus finish their magazine-disciplined hymn. The skittering thins. A vox order cracks the sky. Artillery. Close. The Leman Russ obliges with a punctuation mark. Everything falls quiet in the way a beast rests between breaths. "You unshackled yourself," the sergeant says, voice carefully neutral through a helmet mic. His men are watching Logan in a way that says they've already buried him twice in their minds, just in case they get to make it official. "Your lock had a story," Logan answers, flexing his wrists. The skin is unmarked where the cuffs bit. "I learned the ending." The Inquisitor steps into the circle he and the dead thing make. Her boots smear ichor into a sigil no saint ever endorsed. She looks up at him long enough for him to watch her choosing the words and killing 3 lesser sets. "You're either a liar of uncommon quality," she says, "or you are exactly what you seem. A creature shaped by other wars who refuses to cower when introduced to ours." "I don't cower," he says, because some truths explain themselves. Her gaze drops to the collar, still humming its tight little song. "Remove it," she says to the sergeant. "If he were going to break, he would have done so when the beast chose me." The sergeant hesitates for a beautifully measurable fraction of a second, then keys a rune and unhooks the device. The air around Logan tastes better without it. He didn't realize how much it was souring his temper until it stops. "Status?" the acolyte asks, already writing a conclusion he planned to have no matter what happened. "Observe and deploy," she says. "Threat index remains amber. Sanction pending. Provisional writ of service under my authority." She produces a slab of ceramite the size of a hand and the color of judgment. It bears her mark, a stylized "I like a wound," with script etched in a hand that had the luxury of learning penmanship. She offers it. He doesn't reach for it. She places it on his palm anyway, fingers cool and sure. The material is warm from her body heat and something else. Attention, maybe? A machine spirit pretends not to vibrate inside it. "What's this by me?" he asks. "Time," she says, which is all anyone ever buys in the 41st millennium. It tells the faithful they should shoot you later, not now. It tells the fearful that if you bleed in the correct direction, you belong to something larger than yourself. It tells me that when I point, you will go. He rolls the slab in his hand and slips it into a pocket he tears and re-sews in a blink without thinking about it. "I go where people need killing or saving. You point to both at once sometimes." "Frequently," she says, and almost smiles again. Acolyte Hest, draft the writ. Medici, file the anomalies, then stop thinking about them. Troopers, re-establish the perimeter. Patch the roof and have the tech adepts lace the avenues with Auspex mines. Wolf-Dash quote. He doesn't flinch at the new name because it fits like a scar. He tilts his head. "Stay close," she says. "Not because I fear you'll run. Because I am not finished deciding what you are." He huffs something that could become a laugh if it lived long enough. "You'll decide a lot of things about me. Most of them will be wrong." "Perhaps," she says, and turns away to speak with a Vox officer who salutes her with his whole skeleton. The servo skull peels off him and goes to her shoulder like it was always hers. The Tempestus troopers drift back into their assignments with the relief of men given tasks they know how to do. He takes a breath. The hive breathes with him in creaks and drops, and the far-off snap of something settling crooked. He looks at the guardsmen who are alive because of choices that don't appear in any catechism. He looks at the Inquisitor, who will spend him like a coin if it buys her a fraction of a victory, and he finds he doesn't mind as much as he should. It's not trust, it's clarity. A chime sounds deep in the transport bay. Someone's bell tolling for a new wave, or an old problem pretending to be a new one. He rolls his shoulders, and the memory of the collar shakes loose like water. The rosette glints. The tank grumbles. The veteran who called him Wolf nods at him from across the churned street. Not a salute, not a bow. Just a man recognizing another survivor. "Asset," the acolyte mutters as he passes, like he's spitting something stuck in his teeth. "Person," Logan corrects without breaking stride. He follows the Inquisitor because the path she cuts leads toward trouble and away from comfort, and he's always been more useful in the first kind of place. The parchment seals flutter as if trying to catch him and add a blessing he'll never read. Somewhere above, a pict caster blinks red. Somewhere below, a sump pump coughs and remembers itself. He tucks the ceramite token away, feels its crude promise like a rock in a river, and sets his boots toward the next sound that means somebody is about to need help or killing. He's worth more than a writ and less than a miracle. In a city like this, that's exactly the right size. They test him because the galaxy is a machine that only trusts measurements. The Inquisitor signs a slate, and the testing begins, not in a lab white enough to pretend to be clean, but in a half-collapsed manufactorum where the soot has seniority. Cables hang like vines. Auspex tripods blink. A tech priest hums Binharic lullabies to a rack of weapons that have seen more funerals than marriages. First, they clock his reflexes. A metronome cage spits darts. He catches them until his hands are full. Then he starts letting them hit flesh so he can time how long the holes take to close. The Medici's quill shakes a little when a puncture vanishes mid-syllable. They put him on a treadmill with plates that slide under uneven load. He runs until the plates complain, until the machine spirit sulks and the tech priest calls a truce. He isn't winded. He is hungry, a deep hollow his body keeps shoveling war into. They bring him a tray of guard rations. He eats like shame doesn't exist. They bring another. The Medici's notes become capital letters. Armor comes next. They let him meet a slab of a starter's plate, cracked, retired, still arrogant, and tell him to cut it. He digs in. Sparks skitter like angry flies. The claws bite, score, scream. The ceramite laughs at him where it is thick. He follows the joins, the armpit, the inner elbow, the back of the knee. The laughter stops. He pushes into the gorget, finds the flex, opens a throat that isn't there. The veterans watching don't cheer, but they look at each other like a boring argument just got interesting. "Conclusion," says someone who makes conclusions for a living. He does not cleave the plate. He defeats the man inside. "Good," Logan says. "Shells don't shoot back." They shoot him with a bolter because the profession requires honesty. The Inquisitor is there for that one in person. They load a blessed mass reactive round into a pistol that looks like righteousness carved into steel and tell him not to move. He doesn't. The shot hits center mass. There is a sound like a cathedral door slamming from the inside. He goes down, not neatly, and the world becomes bells and static. He wakes on a stretcher he doesn't remember, tasting copper and priest wax. The hole in his chest is closing, skin knitting over shattered ribs that still crunch comments. It hurts in a way that doesn't care about adjectives. "Don't do that again," he tells the room. "Note the concussion," the medici says softly, more to himself than anyone else. "Note the internal hemorrhage. Note that he survived a single mass-reactive detonation at short range. Note that 2 would make this report a eulogy. They set him on fire because restraint has never been a strong imperial virtue. Promethium clings like a grudge. He goes down, rolling, blistering, snarling. The smell crawls into everyone's hair and refuses to leave. A trooper with a foam sprayer smothers him, hands steady, jaw tight. The burns seal over in obscene stop motion, raw to pink to pale. He sits up with smoke in his lungs and eyes that won't water. The Inquisitor watches without blinking, then speaks like she's ordering lunch. "Avoid flamers. Accept burns. Do not become trapped in enclosed spaces with promethium." "Got it," he says, throat a rasp. No hugs with the man with the can. They bring a Sister of Battle blade with a faint hum around it, a power field chewing air into a fretful mist. He raises a forearm and lets the edge kiss just a little. It bites through hair, skin, a hint of something that isn't supposed to cut. He pulls away fast. Blood beads in a neat, stubborn line that heals slower than it should. He remembers that feeling. Different universe. Same rule. Some edges don't negotiate. "Conclusion," says the acolyte, trying not to sound pleased. "Power weapons bypass his confidence." "Everyone's does," Logan answers. "Point those at someone else." They test poisons without asking permission, because permission is for softer eras. Tyrannid ichor in a diluted mist. His gut twists. His healing slows like it just remembered the word tired. Nurgle rot in a quarantined vial waved near, then farther, then shut away when the candles gutter in a draught that doesn't exist. He doesn't sicken, exactly. He feels unclean, as if his blood picked up a song it refuses to hum. They leech him, burn the leeches, recite a litany they swear is for the patient. His head clears. He goes looking for meat. Psychers, sanctioned and shaking like reeds in a thoughtful wind, sit across from him at a scarred table. One light in the room, one prayer on every lip. "We will taste," the eldest says, voice like paper. "Only surface." Her eyes cloud with little storms. He feels a pressure in his skull, like altitude compressed into a fist. Memories slide under her fingers. Snow, a bar in a town nobody loved, the smell of ozone and metal, and the end of everything. A whisper tries his name on for size, like it's looking for a price tag. The psyker flinches. The whisper gets louder. He doesn't let it. He thinks of stubborn things. The veteran's scar, the priest stitching his own book, a guardsman's panic contained by a single ordered breath. He plants those like stakes around the inside of his head, and the whisper gets bored. The psyker exhales like a puncture. "No gift," she says. "No ward. Merely..." Her mouth finds the shape of the word and gives up. "Willed." "Put a note on me," he says gently. "Not for sale." They take the tests outside because the hive doesn't care about paperwork. The Inquisitor signs him onto a kill team like she's signing for a delivery. His livery mark gets him through doors he would otherwise be shot in the shadow of. He goes where she points. It's a rhythm he can live with. He learns Tyranids by smell. Warm insect light, acid that wants to be a memory, the metallic tang of chitin that shears like glass. He hunts a lictor in the sublevels. It hunts him, and for a while both of them are right. The beast is patient and older than the building. It fits in shadows like he fits in grudges. The first he knows of its strike is the silence that falls wrong, a blind spot in the noise. He's already moving. The talon grazes ribs, slices shirt, leaves a ribbon of blood that closes while it's still falling. He lets it think he's slower than he is. He draws it down a corridor, choked with ruptured promethium lines and not much air. He lures, it lunges, he slips left. It hits a valve with muscle memory. The pipe didn't know it had. Sparks. Fire thinks about being born. He doesn't give it the oxygen. He does give the lictor a crowbar through the wrist and an unpleasant education in what happens when you introduce alien nerve clusters to industrial revealers. When it thrashes, he puts steel through the back of its skull where the plating thins for sensory arrays. It goes still, like a rumor that finally ran out of believers. "Assessment?" the sergeant asks when he climbs out of the hole with chitin on his boots. "Don't let it pick the ground," he says, "and don't blink. Ever." Astartes come like the answer to a question nobody finished asking. Grey armor this time, not wolves. Another chapter with a different hymn, but the same thunder inside it. One of them, taller than common sense, voice like a rock slide you trust, offers him a spar in a pit ringed by guardsmen who pretend they aren't watching. It's not cruelty, it's science. He goes in unarmed because he can't help himself. The Marine respects him enough to keep the power field off his blade. A chain sword growls, hungry even in idle. Logan steps close. The first kiss of teeth on claw is a scream of metal on metal. A shower of chain shrapnel chews the sand. He gets inside the guard, drives for the armpit, gets a gauntlet in the chest that turns the world 3 shades of blue. He lands on his back, stands, grins because now he knows the weight of the hit. Next pass, he feints for the neck seal, goes low, hacks the tendons behind the knee. The giant drops half a step, enough for Logan to hook around and tap the gorget with 2 fingers, like a joke he can't quite tell. The Marine laughs, a sound like boulders meeting old friends. "Acceptable," the giant says. "You die to a bolter at range. At the joint you make a brother think about prayer." "I'll take thinking," Logan says, rubbing a new bruise like it's a familiar. "Note," the acolyte mutters, jealous and diligent. Close quarters asset. Prefers restricted terrain. Requires cover in the open. Avoid artillery. Recommend deployment with scouts or veterans who understand speed. He respects artillery because it respects nothing. He learns the song of the Russ's engine. The note just before the main gun worries the horizon. He memorizes the difference between frag and crack, the way you memorize the difference between an apology and a lie. In open avenues, he uses dead ground and debris like a cloak. In wide plazas, he's a liability unless the team writes him a wall of suppressing fire to run along. He doesn't resent the truth. He uses it. He learns that Melta is not a conversation. He does not get tested with it, because everyone in the room has an instinct that doesn't want to be learned firsthand. He reads the briefing. Superheated air, atoms that remember better days. He plans never to meet it. Sober. They introduce him to Xenos other than orcs and Tyranids. Dark Eldar skim a rooftop like knives remembering a party. He can't catch them. He can smell the perfume of pain they wear like a second skin. He files it. Necrons jerk themselves upright from a field of bones that aren't theirs. He splits a skull and watches it crawl back together with a logic he finds personally offensive. "Don't do that," he tells it, and puts a crack grenade in its chest like an argument it finally understands. He hits limits he can't lie to. He drowns in a sump pool for 4 minutes because a pipe he trusted let go at the wrong second. He wakes on a catwalk, coughing up a decade of other people's secrets. The Medici clocks his blood gas and calls him monstrous like it's a blessing. He spends a day in vacuum when a dock wall fails, clinging to a cable, bones singing, eyes freezing, lungs deciding the paperwork is not worth it. He lives. He does not enjoy it. He learns that healing is not a power. It's a debt he pays with calories and will. He sleeps harder afterward. He wakes hungry enough to make an Ogrin nervous. Warp sorcery hurts in ways he doesn't have names for and refuses to learn. A chaos witch points a finger at a squad of men who loaned him their belief and begins to unmake the noun human from the inside out. He steps between gesture and grammar. The world curdles. The air goes thick with meanings that shouldn't touch lungs. The witch's smile is a curve that wants to be a blade. He takes a step anyway. He bleeds from the ears and eyes. He keeps stepping. The witch tries to make a door out of his shadow. He bolts it with the oldest trick he owns. He decides not to. He reaches the wrist, doing the pointing, and closes a conversation. When the noise stops, the men behind him are still men. He sits down because someone replaced his bones with ringing. After, the Inquisitor looks at him the way you look at a tool you didn't ask for that keeps opening the right doors. "The warp cannot have you," she says, not quite a question. "It can ask," he says. "It can't make me polite." "Noted." She says it to the room, to the quill, to herself. He tests patience as often as physics. He slips the cuffs not to run, but to go where the cuffs can't. He brings back 2 civilians and a box of data slates everyone else assumed was ash. He dodges a commissar's sermon with the grace of an old sinner. He listens to the priest finish sewing his book, then holds the thread while the man ties off. He fights in places optimists call choke points and pessimists call graves. And he walks out, burned, bleeding, alive. Reliable, the word everyone begins using when they don't want to say necessary. He writes his own doctrine as he goes, bullet points in a hand only he can read. Don't chase orcs, let them chase you into architecture. If a blade hums, don't trade. Go around. Wolves are kin. Marines are anvils. Use them like walls that move. Psychers are candles in a hurricane. Shield the flame or snuff the wind. Never be the tallest thing in a plaza when the enemy likes rockets. Fire lies. Acid negotiates. Electricity forgets you if you're faster than its story. Eat early. Eat often. Don't apologize. When whispers start, find a human voice and stand near it. He tries on a bolt pistol once, because every boy tries on his father's shoes. The recoil is a handshake that breaks fingers. He hands it back to the Tempestus with a nod that says respect and never again. He carries knives he doesn't need, because sometimes the right tool is not the best tool, it's the quiet one. He learns the weight of a crack grenade in his palm until it's as familiar as grief. At the end of a long cycle, when power dips to brownouts and the hive sighs like a tired lung, he sits on a ruined balcony with his back to a saint who has no face, and his eyes on a sky that keeps promising things it can't deliver. Below, the guard clean their guns in the way that keeps hands from shaking. A Marine recites something to his armor that might be a prayer or a story of better days. The Inquisitor reads reports in a light that makes everything look guilty. He rolls a cigar between fingers that still remember fire. He doesn't light it. He listens to the building and the men and the machines and the quiet. He counts what he learned, that he can't break this place, that it can break him if he lets it, that if he chooses the ground and the distance and the moment, he can make gods think about math. He's not the biggest thing here. He's not the loudest. He's the thing that shows up where arithmetic fails and makes the numbers work again. Reliable, not invincible. Something rarer. He files the day in that word and goes to find where tomorrow is planning to fail next. They came on a wind that didn't belong to this hive, cold and clean, like snow you haven't stepped in yet. Thunderhawks shouldered the smoke aside and set down with the patience of mountains. The first giant off the ramp wore pelts and iron, like both were the same animal. His canines flashed when he smiled, and the smile was not entirely human. They smelled him before they saw him. He saw that recognition move through them the way a song moves through a bar full of old fighters. Heads lift, eyes sharpen, memories decide to sit closer to the front. One of the grey hunters laughed, a big, delighted sound that made the guardsmen grip their rifles for no reason except that joy from something that size is always a little frightening. "Little cousin," the big one said, stepping over a crater like it owed him money. Runes hung from chains across his chest and sang to themselves. "Whose pack do you run with?" "My own," Logan said, because it was true and not a challenge. His claws stayed away. His hands were empty and ready. A wolf priest with white braids and eyes like knives stepped close. The brass fangs of his helm retracted so he could sell without a filter. He took in the metal under Logan's skin, the scars that were trying to forget they existed, the way his weight fell on the balls of his feet, like he was always half of a decision away from motion. "Wounds that close without prayer," he murmured, not approving and not condemning. "A spirit that refuses to drown." Rune priest? The rune priest. Wolf skull totem at his belt, the air around him full of a weather that had forgotten how to be polite, rested his palm an inch above Logan's shoulder and stopped as if his hand had discovered a cliff where there was supposed to be meadow. "Not of the warp," he said softly. "Not warded either. Just stubborn." "Reliable," Logan answered, because that word had been following him lately, and he was learning to let it. They built a circle out of cracked ferrocrete and curiosity. The Wolf Lord, he never used the title, but titles were a man, kicked aside a little shrine of shell casings and broken teeth and beckoned. "Share a measure," he said, unslinging a skin that smelled like storms taught to ferment. Logan tasted it. It burned in a friendly way and left warmth in his ribs like a good memory. The guardsmen pretended they weren't watching, and the commissar pretended he didn't notice his own hand edging nearer. One of the hunters, brown hair braided back, a puckered scar cutting his cheek into two different opinions, tossed Logan a practice axe and activated the chain on his own, just a growl to let the teeth taste air. "Friendly," the hunter grinned. "Friendliest I get," Logan said, and dropped the axe into the dirt. He flexed his hands. The claws came out with a sound like a promise. They went at each other in a way that made men remember to breathe again. The hunter learned fast that there are places claws don't go because they don't need to. Logan wasn't trying to cleave plate. He was trying to find who the man was inside it. The hunter obliged. He took a mouthful of sand, laughed around it, came up under Logan's guard like a whale breech-wearing armor, and introduced a gauntlet to Logan's ribs that rearranged the furniture. Logan hit the ground, stood, shook the bruise like a friend, and came again. Second pass, he feinted high, cut the belt that held 3 trophies and a week's worth of pride, and drove his shoulder into the hunter's hip hard enough to make the world reconsider its angle. The pack roared approval in a language that didn't need translation. They fed him. It wasn't charity. It was ritual. Great slabs of meat that had seen a fire for maybe a minute, mould thick as stories, bred like a weapon. He ate until the meditor who'd drawn his blood earlier gave up taking notes on where it all went. The Scald, a grizzled Longfang with a voice that made the rust flakes tremble in their places, asked him what names the people he came from gave to winter. He told them some. They told him theirs. He learned that these men carried their dead like poems and their living like debts. At some point in the not night of Hive Dawn, the wolf priest ran a gloved finger along the edge of Logan's forearm, feeling the adamantium, the way it spoke to his bones. "We have a helix," he said, not offering, not threatening. "A seed that makes men of Fenris into what we are. It changes the body to serve the saga. It asks a price." The rune priest stood with his back to a column, looking at nothing in particular, like he was seeing the storm over a sea that never learned his name. "Some flames you don't pour oil on," he said, as if the air had asked him. He looked at Logan. "Your beast has a muzzle you forged yourself, different from ours, enough like ours to make me wary of adding teeth." "I've had enough strangers rearrange me," Logan said. "No offense." "None taken," the wolf priest said. "The Canis Helix is not a gift. It is an oath that never stops being said." He clapped Logan on the shoulder, and the clap would have broken a lesser man. "Run with us without it, then. We have use for a cousin who doesn't carry our curse." They ran. Oh, they ran. Wolves don't conquer streets. They inhale them. They took him through the hive's back lungs, ducts wide enough to fit a tank, catwalks that sang under their weight, service tunnels that remembered water and rats, and the first men who thought a city was a good idea. Wolf Scouts led, faces painted with ash and the simple geometry of survival. Logan fit into that shape without thinking, because shapes like that live in the muscle, not the head. They hit a mech yard at shift tide, when even orcs pretend to count. A big mech shouted at a sea of Gretchen and machines that hated their own bolts. The wolves didn't storm. They hunted. One long fang took a knee on a rooftop and made the night 2 bodies quieter. Logan took out 2 sentries by hearing the breath they didn't know they took before turning around. Someone whispered a Fenrisian prayer that sounded like snow on a pine needle. Someone else stepped on a wrench and everyone froze, because humans are still humans even when they're giants. They went in anyway, because courage is not a negotiable currency here. Logan reached the big mech by going where the crowd was thickest, because density hides. He crawled under a track as tall as a house, smelled hot oil and fungus sweat, and came up behind the mech while it was explaining an idea to a gun with violence. He put one claw into the place where its ideas lived, pinched, twisted, and killed an argument. The wolves collected him like a brother they knew was going to be stubborn about being collected, and they ran out laughing through smoke that hadn't gotten around to deciding what it wanted to burn yet. After, around a fire that tasted like promethium and meat that didn't ask for details, they told their sagas. Not the clean ones, those are for feast halls without ghosts. These were field sagas, half-remembered, sung through cracked lips, interrupted by laughter and the sudden need to stand and demonstrate with a fist what a verse couldn't. Logan didn't have a saga to sing. He had fragments of wars in places these men would never see. He gave them a bar fight in a town the world forgot, a mountain that killed almost everyone, a team that died, and a promise that didn't. The Skald nodded like the notes made sense to him. "You have a long song," he said. "You just sing it in short parts." The rune priest watched him when the Jod went low, and the fire turned from red to thinking. "There is a rage in you," he said. It wasn't insult, it was weather report. "Ours has a name, and we chain it with oaths. Yours, you chain with a memory of the men you stand next to." "That's enough," Logan said. "It might be," the rune priest said, and didn't try to sell him anything else. They were still arguing over whether Jod should be chewed or merely swallowed when the sky changed color. It wasn't weather. It was the wrong kind of light. Red that didn't belong to oxygen or sunsets. Brass that wasn't metal so much as a rule. You smelled it first. Iron without rust, hot leather, the coppery tang of a big animal's breath. You heard it next. Chain axes revving to a pitch that skipped a man's heart and found his spine. The bass note under all of it was a drumbeat that sounded like the universe remembering it has a pulse. The Inquisitor was suddenly there, rosette casting little knives of light, calm like a loaded question. The Voxnet filled up with words nobody wanted to say in their own voice. Cornate, berserkers, warband, murder make. The wolves stood up as one animal. The rune priest's eyes went somewhere far north. Lightning thought about the situation and approved. They came through a wound in the air, because Horn prefers wounds to doors. Red armor, brass sigils, chain teeth hungry, helms fashioned into the sneering skulls of gods who love simple altars. Berserkers hit the ground already running. Behind them, a demon engine dragged chains that tinked against stone like a butcher humming to himself. Bloodletters bled out of the wound afterward, blades thin and curved like laughter at a funeral. The first thing Logan felt was the pressure behind his teeth, the urge to lean into the music, to let his body become the answer to a question it has been asking since someone poured metal into his bones. How much can you kill before the noise stops? The whisper wasn't words, it was relief. "You can be honest here," it said. "No more mercy. No more measuring yourself against smaller creatures. No more being the wall. Be the axe." He bit down on the feeling until he tasted metal and memory. He thought of the medic whose hands didn't shake when they might have, the guardsman who breathed when told, the priest sewing his book because you have to keep your scripture together even when it doesn't want to stay. He pulled the rage up like a tool and refused to let it be the master. The wolves howled, and the howl wasn't a loss of control. It was an oath done out loud. They met the berserkers in the avenue of broken saints, where every column had a story, and every story ended in shrapnel. The Wolf Lord went through the first line like a promise kept late. Grey hunters made a shield wall that didn't look like a wall because it moved. Sky claws came down like idiot angels, jump packs drawing lines of light in the smoke. Long fangs found roofs and sang with missiles. The rune priest raised his staff, and the weather remembered whose side it was on. The air went sharp, cold, unforgiving. Chain axes met frost, and for a second the world sang in two keys. Logan picked his ground the way he always did. Tight ruins, stairs that had opinions about ankles, choke points that made big men forget how wide their shoulders were. The first berserker he met tried to split him into a lesson. He stepped inside and turned the man's arm into two problems and then into none. Power armor is a cathedral, but cathedrals have doors. A man who doesn't care about his own blood can find. He went for joints, seals, places where the pride of a craftsman had been allowed to express itself as a hinge. He did not trade. He took. Bloodletters are different. Their blades attached to the idea of a body. Their swords bit him, and the wound argued about closing. He didn't. He let pain be a map. He grabbed a length of chain from a burned-out shrine, looped it around a bloodletter's blade arm, and used its own simplicity against it. Pull, twist, knees, throat. Warp ichor hissed on his claws, trying to write its own language in his veins. He refused the sentence and broke the pen. The demon engine, iron muscles, furnace heart, limbs like factory accidents, came like a train that disagreed with the concept of stops. It pinned a grey hunter to a wall and tried to decide which half to eat first. Logan was there because he's always there when something needs to be smaller. He put claws into pistons, into hoses, into the wrong place at the right time. Sparks baptized him. Heat tried to tell him a story about ending. He dragged a cable loose, and the machine stuttered. A long fang took the hint and drove a crack missile into the place Logan's hand was, because trust looks like that in this galaxy. He rolled. The engine made a noise like a cathedral discovering gravity and died loudly. The champion found him at the corner where the street makes an argument with itself and loses. Brass rune on his chest, chain axe weeping machine oil and old prayers. No skull on his helm, because he hadn't earned his own yet. "Come take," the champion said through a speaker that made honesty sound bigger and worse. "No," Logan said. "Come try." The first swing would have split a man who enjoyed symmetry. Logan didn't. He ducked and felt the wind of its sheer hair. He cut the champion twice, underarm, hip, and gave him nothing in return but mockery and a mouthful of his own breath. Horn loves displays. Logan is not a display. He is a subtraction. He let the axes bite walls and pillars, let the champion put his strength into architecture, and then he took away everything architecture was trying to hold up. The ceiling came down in a tired sigh. Dust and smoke and old saints fell together. The chain axe snarled and then choked. In the narrow, blind ruin, the champion couldn't swing stage-wide. Logan could move. 3 strikes like a very old poem. Tendon, tendon, throat. The champion sank, hands trying to keep a head on a neck that didn't want it anymore. The brass rune cracked. The music in Logan's blood got quieter, embarrassed by competence. Around them, the wolves made their horror beautiful. A grey hunter took a chain axe on his pauldron and turned, fluid, to make the answer into a kill. A skyclaw crashed and didn't rise. 2 more landed on either side, teeth bared, jump packs making the air smell like alchemy. The rune priest Storm walked down the boulevard, frost blooming on chain teeth, breath turning to ghosts that fled. The Wolflord's laughter got louder when it was hardest to hear. Khorne's warband hates retreat because the word implies someone else has a say. They don't retreat. They break. It happened the way chaos always does when it discovers arithmetic. At once, in pieces, everywhere. Blood letters lost coherence and became very sharp air. Berserkers forgot what their legs were for, because their heads had found a new job as decorations. The demon engine was already a story told in parts. The hole in the sky clenched shut like a fist. Silence came back, grudging, dragging chain links and dark steam with it. Logan stood in it, chest working, wounds arguing and then apologizing and then knitting. He spat out something red and hot that wasn't his, and rolled his shoulder where the champion's first earnestness had kissed him. The Inquisitor walked through the ruin like it was a court, and she was both judge and prosecution. She looked at the corpse of the champion, at the engine, at Logan's hands. His claws were still out. They slid back in, slow, like he was putting away a knife he'd learned to like. Sanction, she said, the word clipped, unsentimental. Provisional was a waste of ink. You've earned the writ the hard way. She produced parchment warm from her coat and pressed a seal so the wax bled like something alive. She held it out. He took it and felt the weight of it like a small stone in a pocket. Not much by itself, enough to make a compass needle think twice. Names matter, the Wolf Lord said, stepping close, snow clinging to his beard, even though there was no snow here. We do not give them like medals, we give them like scars. He turned to the Scald. Sing him. The Scald nodded, throat already finding a rhythm. He spoke in a low, rough cadence, as if he were explaining something to a child of the sea. He named the mech yard and the way the big mech's ideas ended. He named the demon engine and the cable and the trust of the missile. He named the champion and the ceiling and the quiet that followed. He named the chain first and the choice second. When he got to the part about the whisper in the blood, he didn't make it a holy thing. He made it a dirty thing stood up and washed anyway. Claw that chooses, the Scald finished. Wolf without seed. Pack guessed. Red snow denier. The pack repeated the last one with rough pleasure. They liked the sound of it in their mouths. Logan shook his head, but it wasn't refusal. It was that sideways gesture a man makes when he hears a truth about himself and doesn't know where to put it yet. You'll make it sound like more than it is. Then live under it, the Wolf Lord grinned. Grow to fit. That is the joke we tell each other over graves. The rune priest stepped close again, weather all over him like a cloak. How loud was it? He asked, a private question between men who've punched the same thunder. Loud enough, Logan said, not louder than breath. Good, the rune priest said. Keep a man close whose breath you trust. That is how we make it through the red days. The guardsmen were already moving into the wreckage, collecting the living, tallying the dead, sweeping brass as if tidiness could make sense of anything. The commissar holstered his pistol like it was a sacrament. The priest's book held together. The veteran with the mouth scar met Logan's eyes across a mess of stone and meat and nodded once. No salutes, no speeches, just that. The Inquisitor watched the wolves watching him. She wasn't jealous. She was cataloguing. You'll stay with them for now, she said, making it an order because that's how she makes kindnesses survive in her mouth. You move how they move. You go where I point. If their saga pulls you one way, and my need pulls you another, you will make a choice. You already know which, and I already know my opinion of it. That's as honest as we will get. Fair, he said. They built a fire out of Horn's broken promises and warmed their hands on it. The wolves told a shorter version of the saga they'd just lived, because you have to say it twice, or it doesn't belong to you. They tried to pour Mejode on the ground for the dead, and the hive drank it before it could hit stone. The rune priest smiled at that, and called it a good sign. The wolf priest closed the eyes of a skyclaw, and put a tooth in his palm. Logan stood with the pack, and didn't speak until the words he had weren't going to ruin the ones they needed. He stayed, days folded into each other, stitched by hunts and the small mercies of shared food, and the big mercies of being understood without having to explain too much. He learned the rhythm of their jokes, the bite in their kindness, the way they argued like men who planned to be brothers afterward. He didn't take the helix. He took the howl when they gave it, and gave it back. When the sky healed and the city slept in the fitful way cities do, he took a walk. The wolves let him. The wolf lord clapped him once. The rune priest nodded like weather acknowledging a mountain. The skald promised to make the next verse better if he brought back something where a rhyme should go. The Inquisitor pretended not to notice the way her rosette sat on his chest, like it had decided to like him. He left a note that wasn't ink. He carved 3 shallow, clean lines in a pillar near the trench where a guardsman had learned how to breathe. No names, no marks, just that. Then he folded himself into the hive's dark and went where men were going to need someone who knew how to make numbers behave in streets that don't like math. Behind him, a pack sang not out loud, but the way wolves do when they agree about a direction. Ahead of him, the red in his blood was quiet. It would wake when he needed it, and he would choose again. That was the whole point. The smoke thins. The red fades from the sky. Somewhere a tank coughs itself to sleep, and the hymn of a tired priest trails off between broken saints. Logan rolls a cigar between his fingers and doesn't light it. The rosette in his pocket is a borrowed promise. The fang at his neck is a loaned brotherhood. Both weigh less than the choice he'll make when the next alarm starts lying. He isn't the biggest monster in this galaxy. He isn't a god, a demon, or a legend pressed into ceramite. He's something smaller and harder to kill. A decision that shows up. In a place that worships extremes, he picks the middle of the fight and refuses to move. That's why the guardsmen whisper he's real. That's why the wolves call him cousin. That's why the warp keeps trying his name like a key that doesn't fit. Where does it go from here? Maybe he takes the writ and turns it into a map of worlds that heal just long enough to tell the tale. Maybe the Canis Helix tempts him, and he says no with a grin, or yes with a price. Maybe a grey knight looks him in the eye and decides which kind of miracle he is. Maybe a Primarch's shadow passes over a battlefield, and he doesn't bother looking up. He's busy keeping one more kid breathing. For now, the camera can't follow. He slips into the hive's dark with that old, stubborn gait, tracking the next bad idea in need of fixing. The 41st millennium keeps its hope in rumors. Tonight, one of those rumors is a short man with long claws who still chooses who to save. If you want part 2, tell me who he meets next. Tyranid hive fleets, a Necron tomb world, or a date with the Grey Knights. And if you liked this what if, tap the buttons, share it with a fellow lore goblin, and drop your wildest crossover below. The saga continues when you say so.